هو اول حاجه بس انا عاوز اعرف اسم حضرتك بالكامل والبوزيشن بتاع حضرتك والتايتل.
دكتور عمرو عبد القوي, Professor of Practice in Architecture,
Okay.
the AUC.
Okay. Actually, we're gonna have the interview in English, so we can switch to English. Okay. What do you like at the beginning? Can you tell us more about like the emergency exit exhibition and the art next art club, like briefly or?
Yeah, well, the emergency exit was an attempt to capture that trend that is developing in Egypt for urban growth in the form of new desert communities. This notion of we are overcrowded in the Nile Valley, 95% of the population living on 5% of the land, we need to move out to the desert, has been an ever-present drive ever since the 50s even, okay? And various attempts by the various successive governments to create options for moving out of the Nile Valley. That started with Nasser when they created the new valley governorate, which is to be a parallel valley to the Nile Valley. And then later on, Sadat came along and created the satellite cities around Cairo, and then that continued during the Mubarak era and now is continuing in the Sisi era. It's these successive drives, it seems to be like this is seen as the only solution. Yet, ironically, the population of those who actually move to these new communities is minimal compared to the population growth of the country. So the Greater Cairo city is actually growing exponentially, whilst you're building all these cities on the outskirts, and they're not getting filled up in any comparable manner. But that's the irony of it, and that's the idea behind emergency exit exhibition. We're posing that as a question. Then we're also posing the issue of okay, these new communities, what are they, or these new desert cities rather, are they really addressing the issue of living in the desert? Are they bringing about a new quality of life? Are they proposing a new prototype for living? Or are they simply recycling of existing ideas and not bringing anything new? And the key question is, are they really sustainable? And are they taking us somewhere or not? Or will we keep on looking for that dream world farther to the east and west into the desert without having a clear answer to it?
Okay, that's good. So you think that the government is leading to this?
Is
leading to the gated communities?
No, the gated communities concept, of course, is a derivative of that new prototype of living. You know, you have to. The government discovered that if you trace back the history of these new urban city or new communities, you'll find that they took a very long time to actually catch on. The first cities that were developed in the 79 or so. You know, Sadat City, 10th of Ramadan, 6th of October, and so forth. And they sort of did not succeed to take off for possibly 20 odd years. Not much happened there. Very few people actually moved there. Yes, the factories as industrial cities, they worked and developed, but they didn't succeed as living cities. And in the late 90s, the government discovered with this new liberal approach that if we start selling it to the elite and creating this new genre of gated communities, this would actually work and it would become a different form of attractor. The notion of development actually transformed in the late 90s. and the government now started to see that land and approach it as a speculation project, and to start to evaluate this desert into actual worthwhile land. And the way to do that was to make it elitist, to make it exclusive, and that the notion of gated community became the genre at that time. That took off from the perspective of a commercial enterprise, from the commercial part of how do we evaluate land which is not really worth much. So it's desert land, and we have a lot of that, and it's not really worth much. So how do you make it worth a lot of money? So you create this notion of an exclusive community. It did not start out with an attempt to segregate society, but it started out with a smart commercial move. However, it probably caught on because big part of your population, with the overgrowth of the city of Cairo, density was very high, and living there was becoming a problem. And by default, the social mobility drives, where the upper classes always want to move somewhere and then and find alternate ways of creating a better quality life. That sort of caught up with that drive, because Mohandesin was full, Garden City was full, Heliopolis was full. You needed to move somewhere else. The gated community genre came into existence at that time, and it was that dream life that was sold to the elite, and then it took on, and maybe contributed to it the fact that the government had sort of regulations that accentuated the role of the fence. That actually in the zoning laws and the coding laws, having a fence around the property is a prerequisite, which is very ironic. That even if you're building a private residence in these new communities, you are by law required to build a fence, which is quite ironic in the sense that the law is promoting segregation of residences of the same city. And that fence is not only around the gated community, but it's also around your individual home. The fence and the gate became the norm in these new communities, and the notion of exclusivity, the notion of separatedness between of fear, safety, that's all of these came into existence to fuel it even more, and it took on. It's a little bit